They thought the GPS would guide them home. Instead, it led them into silence. Two best friends. One endless highway. A vanished signal. For 15 years, their families lived in the shadows of half-answers and false leads. But when a cryptic GPS file was finally decoded, it uncovered a chilling truth. The coordinates traced a deliberate pattern, one meant to hide something. Every year, thousands of travelers follow unseen digital directions without questioning them. But what happens when a glitch or someone behind the code turns guidance into a trap? Tonight, we retrace the last drive of Ethan and Marcus and reveal the warning signs most people still overlook. Because the most dangerous signal is the one that looks completely normal. The low hum of wind swept over endless crimson dunes. Sunlight flickered against the cracked windshield of an abandoned 2002 Jeep Cherokee. Doors closed, keys in the ignition. One tire half buried in sand. The dashboard clock read 9:46 p.m., frozen mid-tick. There were no tire tracks leading away. No footprints, only the deep, suffocating silence of the desert. 3 days before the Jeep was found, Ethan Cole and Marcus Delaney had been laughing. Camera footage from a Flagstaff gas station captured their final public moments. Two college seniors filling the Jeep's tank, Ethan adjusting his camera bag, Marcus studying a paper map spread across the hood. "One last road trip before adulthood swallows us whole," Marcus had written in his last text message to his sister. "Back by Sunday night, definitely before graduation rehearsal Monday." They never made it to Sunday. Detective Carl Winters stood beside the abandoned Jeep, squinting against the punishing May sun. The vehicle sat at the end of a dirt path that didn't appear on any official map, 58 miles from the nearest highway junction. Local rangers called it Ghost Road, a forgotten utility access trail that hadn't been maintained since the early 1990s. "Keys still in the ignition," he noted into his recorder. "Engine starts, 3/4 tank remaining, GPS unit still powered, though the screen shows only a loading animation." He paused, circling the vehicle. No signs of violence or struggle, personal belongings intact, including wallets with cash and ID, 2 smartphones under the front seats, batteries dead. What troubled him most was the orderliness of it all, as if the two men had simply stepped out for a moment and vanished. Ethan's jacket was folded neatly in the back seat. Their expensive camping gear remained untouched in the trunk. 2 water bottles sat in the cup holders, one still half full. Detective Winters had worked missing persons cases in Arizona's backcountry for 14 years. Hikers strayed off trails. Tourists underestimated the desert heat. College kids made stupid, impulsive decisions. But this was different. This was methodical. The search intensified over the following weeks. Helicopter sweeps, cadaver dogs, ground. Teams combing every ravine and wash for miles. They found nothing. No bodies, no blood, no personal effects. Ethan and Marcus had simply ceased to exist beyond that point on Ghost Road. Digital forensics teams examined their devices, hoping for clues. What they found only deepened the mystery. Their GPS was set to a route that doesn't exist, explained Janet Cruz, the lead digital analyst. It shows them turning off Highway 89 onto what appears to be a scenic detour, but our mapping systems don't recognize it. The coordinates don't align with any current roads. More unsettling was the timestamp on the final photograph from Ethan's camera, 7:58 p.m. on May 15, 2008, a stunning sunset over red rock formations. The next file was corrupted, fragmented data, unreadable. The GPS log cut off 20 minutes later. After that, digital silence. Phone records showed their final signals pinging near an abandoned utility station at 9:42 p.m. Then nothing. Both phones went offline simultaneously. When search teams investigated the utility station, they found only empty desert. The coordinates didn't match. "It's like something was masking their location," Cruz said, frowning at her screen. These duplicate coordinates, it's not a natural signal error. As days turned to weeks, the search scaled back. The case files grew thicker with interviews, theories, and dead ends, but no answers. The desert had swallowed Ethan and Marcus without a trace, leaving only questions that would haunt their families for years. Rebecca Cole, Ethan's older sister, refused to let the case fade into legend. While others eventually moved forward, she remained anchored to May 15, 2008, the day her brother vanished. The police told me people disappear in the desert all the time, she said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. But not like this. Not two healthy, experienced young men, not without something left behind. Rebecca began keeping meticulous notes, inconsistencies in police reports, questions never fully addressed, patterns others missed. She called it her shadow investigation, conducted around the edges of her career as a freelance journalist. The more she learned about digital tracking and navigation systems, the more certain she became that something was being overlooked. She never imagined it would take 15 years to uncover what had happened to her brother and his best friend, or that the answer had been hiding in plain sight all along, embedded in corrupted data from a forgotten camera. "Mom, you don't have to do this now." Rebecca Cole stood in the doorway of her childhood bedroom, watching her mother pack Ethan's things into cardboard boxes. 15 years had passed since her brother's disappearance, but Mary Cole had preserved his room like a museum exhibit. Posters still on the walls, textbooks stacked beside his desk, his favorite blue sweater draped over the desk chair. Mary paused, a framed photograph in her hands. "Your father and I are moving to that retirement community next month. I can't bring all of this." She hesitated. "It's time." Rebecca nodded, fighting the tightness in her throat. Her father's health had deteriorated in recent years, accelerated by grief and uncertainty. The neurologist had used words like cognitive decline and stress-induced hypertension, but Rebecca knew the simpler truth. Her father was dying from not knowing what had happened to his son. "Let me help," she said, crossing to the closet where Ethan had stored his photography equipment. The camera bag was still caked with dried sand, a relic from that final trip. Rebecca had examined it years ago when the case was still active, but now she found herself unzipping it again, running her fingers over the familiar texture of Ethan's favorite Canon. That's when she felt it, a small, hard object wedged in the lining of an interior pocket. Pulling the fabric back revealed a memory card, warped slightly with age. Her heart quickened. How had investigators missed this? Later that night in her apartment, Rebecca carefully connected the card to a special reader designed for damaged media. Most files were corrupted or fragmented, static-filled images of rock formations, blurred desert vistas, Marcus smiling beside the Jeep. But one file was different. Hidden among the corrupted data was a coordinate file, renamed with a cryptic string of numbers: 37.021 degrees, 1.381 degrees. When Rebecca entered them into Google Earth, the location appeared miles northeast of the original search area, in a remote section of federal land known for its abandoned mining claims. "This doesn't make sense," she whispered, zooming in on the barren landscape. "That's nowhere near where they found the Jeep." The next day, she called Detective Raul Mendez, who had taken over the case after Winters retired. Initially skeptical, his interest sharpened when she mentioned the coordinates. "Send me the file," he said. "I know someone who might be able to help." That someone was Dr. Eliza Kwan, a digital forensics specialist who had consulted on military cybersecurity breaches. When Kwan analyzed the memory card, she discovered something remarkable. Not just one set of coordinates, but multiple waypoint logs embedded in the image metadata, layered in complex, overlapping patterns. "This isn't random corruption," Kwan explained. pointing to her screen where she had mapped the extracted data points. These coordinates form a deliberate circular pattern around a central location. It's almost like a search grid or... She hesitated. Or what? Rebecca prompted. Or a target, Quan said quietly. The question is, what was at the center? When mapped together, the coordinates formed a perfect circle around a single focal point, an area approximately 30 miles from where the Jeep had been discovered. This region had once been crossed by prospector trails, used decades earlier to access uranium deposits before being declared off-limits. Records showed the last person to legally maintain these trails was a man named Lyle Wren, a notoriously reclusive local who had mapped the region extensively before his death in 2012. Searching online forums from 2008, Rebecca found something that made her breath catch, a thread where Marcus had posted questions about unmarked landmarks in the desert between Flagstaff and Moab. Among the responses was a user named Desert Eyes LR, offering to share better routes than any commercial map will show you. I think I know what happened, Rebecca told Mendez that evening. Marcus contacted this guy Wren about secret routes. Wren sent him coordinates. But they weren't just directions. They were a trap. Mendez frowned. But why? What would this Wren character have to gain by luring two college kids into the desert? I don't know yet, Rebecca admitted, but there's one way to find out. She tapped her screen, showing Mendez a permit application she'd already filled out. I'm going back to the desert, to the center of those coordinates. Will you come with me? Mendez studied the form, then nodded slowly. Let me call in some specialized equipment. If we're reopening this case, we're going to do it right. 3 days later, Rebecca stood beside Mendez as their four-wheel drive vehicle crawled through the desert. The landscape seemed unchanged from 15 years ago. The same red rocks, the same merciless sun, the same oppressive silence. But now, they had technology that hadn't existed when Ethan and Marcus disappeared. Drones buzzed overhead, mapping the terrain with thermal imaging. Ground-penetrating radar swept the area in careful grids. For hours, they found nothing but endless desert. Then, as sunset approached, casting the same golden red light captured in Ethan's final photograph, one of the technicians called out, "We've got something, metal fragments, buried about 3 feet down." The excavation began carefully, methodically. As layers of sand were brushed away, Rebecca felt her pulse quicken. Metal fragments emerged, first small pieces, then larger ones. A license plate, warped and sand-blasted but still readable, Arizona VYR 219, the Jeep's plate. But this makes no sense, Mendez said, confusion evident in his voice. The Jeep was found intact 50 miles from here. How could parts of it be buried in this location? The answer came the following day, when historians from the state archives confirmed what Rebecca had begun to suspect. The area overlapped with abandoned military survey sites once used for testing prototype navigation systems, precursors to modern GPS. The technology had been decommissioned decades ago, but the digital infrastructure remained ghost-like in the system. They drove into a digital dead zone, Dr. Kwan explained, reviewing the new data. These old military grids could interfere with civilian GPS signals, creating false readings or phantom routes. But what's strange is that these interferences should have been removed from the system years before 2008. Unless someone deliberately reactivated them, Rebecca said quietly. Further excavation revealed more. Fragments of a tent, a melted steak, the metal frame of Ethan's backup camera, and most heartbreaking of all, 2 sets of dog tags, not military but the kind friends might wear, fused together by extreme heat. Forensic analysis suggested exposure and dehydration as the likely cause of death, but there was also evidence of altered tire tracks, signs that another vehicle had approached their campsite that night. I think I know what happened, Mendez said grimly. Wren was using these old military grid points to mask illegal mining operations. He had created his own private maps, embedding false routes into public devices through software patches, shortcuts that would lead people away from his activities. And Marcus downloaded one of those patches, Rebecca realized. They thought they were taking a scenic shortcut. Exactly. The GPS led them directly into this dead zone. Their phones lost signal, their navigation system failed, and they became disoriented. They tried to camp for the night, waiting for daylight to find their way out. But why was the Jeep found miles away and intact? Mendez's expression hardened. Because someone moved it, probably Wren himself or one of his associates. They found Ethan and Marcus after they'd already died from exposure, and they relocated the vehicle to throw off any search efforts. The final piece of the puzzle came from Wren's old computer files, obtained through a warrant served on his estate. Buried in encrypted folders were detailed maps of ghost routes, digital paths designed to manipulate GPS systems by exploiting vulnerabilities in early navigation software. These routes didn't just cover the area where Ethan and Marcus had disappeared. They formed a network across the Southwest, creating digital voids around dozens of sites where Wren had interests: abandoned mines, private claims, and areas with valuable mineral deposits. More disturbing were the records of other incidents: hikers, tourists, and travelers who had gone missing in similar circumstances. Their vehicles sometimes found, sometimes not. In each case, GPS anomalies had been reported, but dismissed as technical glitches. Ethan and Marcus hadn't been Wren's only victims. They were just the ones someone had finally found. The desert didn't swallow them, Rebecca said, standing at the site where her brother had died. The map did. In her final report, Rebecca documented everything: the manipulated coordinates, the digital deceptions, the systematic exploitation of trust in technology. Her investigation expanded beyond Ethan and Marcus to include other potential victims of similar ghost routes around the country. The story made national headlines: Digital Detours, How Manipulated Maps Led Travelers to Their Deaths. Sitting in her car after the last interview, Rebecca noticed her GPS recalculating as she prepared to drive away from the site. The screen flickered briefly, then displayed, "Scenic detour available, save 10 minutes." Her finger hovered over the screen for a moment. Then she powered off the device and reached for her paper map instead. Some routes weren't worth taking, no matter how much time they promised to save. It starts harmlessly: a shortcut, a scenic route, a suggestion from your navigation system that promises to save you 10 minutes. We trust it without question, our eyes glued to the digital blue line. But sometimes the detours are where control slips away. In the case of Ethan Cole and Marcus Delaney, their fatal journey began with a simple notification on their GPS screen: Scenic alternative route, save 15 minutes. The decision seemed trivial at the time. Who wouldn't choose the more picturesque path that also happened to be faster? But that single tap initiated a cascade of events that would end with 2 promising young lives extinguished in the desert. The last text message Marcus sent to his sister mentioned taking the scenic route, explains Detective Raul Mendez, who led the reopened investigation. He wrote, "GPS found us a shortcut through some amazing rock formations. The roads look a little rough, but the views are insane. Worth it." That message, sent at 6:42 p.m. on May 15, 2008, was the last non-automated communication from either man. What Marcus couldn't have known was that the shortcut had been deliberately embedded into public navigation systems by Lyle Wren, a local prospector with extensive knowledge of the region's unmapped trails. Wren had created digital overlays that made non-existent roads appear legitimate to GPS devices, roads that led directly to areas where he didn't want official attention. It was a sophisticated form of digital trespassing, explains Dr. Eliza Kwan, the forensic data analyst who helped decode the corrupted GPS files. Wren essentially created phantom roads that looked real to navigation systems, but weren't on any official maps. When drivers followed these routes, they would find themselves on rough utility trails or old mining paths that appeared to connect to legitimate highways but actually terminated in isolated areas. The technique exploited a vulnerability in early GPS systems, which prioritized stored route data over real-time satellite information when signals were weak, a common occurrence in desert canyons. Once a vehicle entered these areas, the navigation system would continue displaying the phantom route rather than acknowledging the absence of an actual road. For Ethan and Marcus, this meant driving deeper into increasingly remote terrain, believing they were on a legitimate shortcut until they reached a point where they couldn't turn back, either because of rugged conditions or disorientation. The real danger was how normal everything seemed at first, says Rebecca Cole, Ethan's sister, who spent 15 years searching for answers. The detour looked official on their screen. It promised to save time. It appeared to connect back to their original route eventually. There were no obvious red flags until it was too late. By examining Ethan's camera footage recovered from the memory card, investigators were able to retrace much of their final journey. The photos show their initial excitement, spectacular vistas of striated red rock formations, sunlight, casting dramatic shadows across desert arroyos, Marcus standing triumphantly on a boulder overlooking an expansive canyon. They thought they'd discovered something special, Rebecca says quietly, a hidden gem that regular tourists didn't know about. That's exactly what made the trap so effective. The final photographs taken around sunset show increasing signs of concern, the dirt path narrowing, the terrain becoming rougher, and in the last clear image taken at 7:58 p.m., their GPS screen is visible, still confidently displaying a route that promised to reconnect with Highway 191 in 8.2 miles. That junction didn't exist. Real-world parallels to the Cole Delaney case have emerged with disturbing frequency. In Death Valley, California, a German tourist family followed GPS directions onto an abandoned mining road in 2009, resulting in fatal dehydration when their vehicle became disabled. In Australia's Simpson Desert, 3 travelers died in 2011 after their navigation system directed them away from maintained roads during a heat wave. What makes these cases so troubling is how the victims' trust was weaponized against them, notes Dr. Sarah Landon, a psychologist specializing in decision-making under stress. We've been conditioned to trust digital guidance implicitly. When the GPS says, turn right, we turn right, often without questioning whether that road is suitable for our vehicle or if the conditions are safe. This automatic trust creates a perfect opportunity for exploitation, whether through deliberate manipulation, as in the Cole Delaney case, or through the limitations of technology itself. The warning signs are subtle but crucial. A route suggestion that doesn't appear on other maps or apps. Directions taking you onto unmarked or poorly maintained roads. Sudden loss of cell service combined with continued GPS functionality. Roads that narrow or degrade in quality, while your navigation still insists you're on the correct path. Local signage that contradicts your GPS directions. The most important thing to remember, stresses Detective Mendez, is that no time saved is worth risking your safety. If a detour doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. Turn around while you still can. As Rebecca Cole noted in her final investigation report, the illusion of guidance can kill as efficiently as any trap. A friendly voice, promising a faster way, can sometimes be the beginning of the end. Maps don't make mistakes, right? That's what most of us believe, but GPS can be manipulated. Data can be altered. When we surrender our instincts to screens, we lose our oldest survival tool, doubt. On May 14, 2008, the day before their fateful journey, Marcus Delaney posted in an obscure online forum dedicated to off-road exploring in the Southwest. The post, recovered years later during the reopened investigation, reads, "Downloaded a custom map pack from Desert Eyes LR for our Flagstaff Moab trip tomorrow. Says it includes unmarked scenic routes and hidden viewpoints, not on commercial maps. Anyone used his routes before? Worth the $4.99? 3 users responded affirmatively, praising the incredible shortcuts and secret spots they discovered using these custom maps. Investigators later determined all 3 accounts were created by Lyle Wren himself, digital sock puppets designed to lend credibility to his dangerous routes. It was an elaborate form of digital entrapment, explained cybersecurity expert Trevor McKenzie. Wren created a closed ecosystem of fake verification. He'd pose as satisfied customers recommending his own products, creating an illusion of trustworthiness. Marcus downloaded the custom software patch and installed it on their GPS unit the night before departure. This seemingly minor decision fundamentally altered how their navigation system would interpret terrain and suggest routes. The technical aspects were quite sophisticated, says Dr. Kwan, who analyzed the corrupted GPS firmware recovered from the Jeep. Wren had essentially created a parallel mapping reality that overlaid the legitimate GPS data. In areas where he wanted to direct traffic, his software would suppress actual road information and substitute his own digital paths. These alterations weren't random. They specifically targeted areas where Wren had active mining claims or was conducting illegal prospecting operations. By diverting travelers away from these locations, or in some cases, directly into dangerous terrain, he maintained his privacy and avoided detection by authorities. What's particularly disturbing about this case, notes former FBI analyst James Porter, is how it exploits our psychological relationship with technology. We've reached a point where many people would sooner trust their GPS than their own eyes. If the screen shows a road, they'll keep driving, even as the actual path deteriorates into nothing. This blind trust is a relatively new psychological phenomenon. Studies show that approximately 65% of drivers under 35 will follow GPS directions even when they contradict visible road conditions or posted signs. This percentage decreases with age, suggesting that younger generations have developed deeper dependence on digital guidance. There's a generational component to this vulnerability, explains Dr. Landon. People who grew up navigating with paper maps tend to maintain spatial awareness and question electronic directions that don't make sense. Those who've always relied on GPS often lack this protective skepticism. Ethan and Marcus, both 22 at the time of their disappearance, fell squarely into the high-trust demographic. Friends described them as tech-savvy and always early adopters of new navigation apps and digital tools. This predisposition made them perfect targets. The recovered GPS unit from their Jeep revealed that Wren's software had been updated with third-party modifications months before their final trip. Modifications neither family remembered authorizing. These alterations allowed for the insertion of custom waypoints and routes that appeared legitimate within the system. It's like having someone secretly change all the street signs in your neighborhood, explains Detective Mendez. You'd still believe you were navigating correctly, but you'd end up somewhere entirely different than intended. The coordinates recovered from Ethan's camera led straight into desert land, managed by no official authority. A digital no man's land deliberately created to mask Wren's activities. Similar cases of GPS manipulation have emerged with increasing frequency. In Brazil, criminals have created fake GPS waypoints that direct tourists into ambush locations. In rural England, farmers have reported trucks and buses attempting to navigate narrow farm tracks because navigation systems identified them as viable routes. And in California, several hikers have died after following outdated GPS trails that no longer exist. The warning signs of potential GPS manipulation include sudden rerouting to unfamiliar paths without clear reason, navigation continuing confidently, even when you've clearly left established roads, custom map overlays, or local guides. From unverified sources, routes that lead through private property or restricted areas, GPS signal that remains strong while cell service disappears. The most important defense is maintaining situational awareness, advises wilderness survival expert Maya Rodriguez. No technology is infallible. Always have backup navigation methods, paper maps, compass, or even just a clear understanding of cardinal directions and major landmarks. As Rebecca Cole concluded in her investigation, when we trust every signal, we invite deception into our most vulnerable moments. Be skeptical. Technology remembers everything, but not always the truth. Not all disappearances begin outside. Sometimes they start in the silence between two people. Resentment, jealousy, or guilt can mutate into bad decisions, and when paired with an isolated setting, small tensions become dangerous catalysts. In the months following Ethan and Marcus's disappearance, investigators focused primarily on external factors: the manipulated GPS, the isolated terrain, the deceptive routes created by Lyle Wren. But the reopened investigation uncovered a more nuanced reality. Internal tensions had contributed to the fatal chain of events. We always portrayed Ethan and Marcus as these inseparable friends embarking on one last adventure, Rebecca Cole admits. That was the narrative we needed to believe. But the truth was more complicated. Among Ethan's recovered possessions was a small leather-bound journal, his photographer's notebook, where he recorded thoughts about potential shots and locations. The last entries, written during their trip, revealed fractures in the friendship that no one had previously acknowledged. May 14, 2008. M still won't say why he's so obsessed with finding this landmark. Says it'll make great photos, but I'm not convinced that's all. Something feels off. Haven't pushed it because it's our last trip together, but starting to regret agreeing to this detour. May 15th morning. Argument about the route. M insistent we use his special map from that prospector guy online. Claims it shows places no tourists ever see. I wanted to stick to the original plan. We're burning daylight and fuel on what feels like a wild goose chase. What's he not telling me? These entries painted a different picture than the carefree road trip narrative that had dominated media coverage of their disappearance. Additional investigation revealed that Marcus had been corresponding extensively with Lyle Wren in the weeks before their trip, exchanging dozens of messages about off-map landmarks and collection sites. We believe Marcus was lured by Wren's stories about abandoned mining equipment and possibly valuable mineral samples, explains Detective Mendez. Wren cultivated his interest, presenting himself as a mentor figure willing to share insider knowledge about the desert's hidden treasures. Marcus, an engineering student fascinated by historical industrial equipment, appears to have been genuinely captivated by these promises. He kept his deeper motivations from Ethan, perhaps knowing his friend would disapprove of deviating from their planned route for what amounted to amateur prospecting. This created a dangerous dynamic, notes Dr. Landon. One person withholding information, the other sensing something wrong, but not confronting it directly. When they eventually found themselves in trouble, this underlying tension likely hindered their decision-making. Text messages recovered from Marcus's phone backup reveal his growing excitement about the secret sites Wren had promised to share. To Jenna, sister, May 13th, 2008. This guy online showed me coordinates for some abandoned uranium testing equipment from the 1950s. Super rare, no one's photographed it before. Could be my ticket into that National Geographic contest. Don't tell Mom she'd freak about radiation or whatever. It's fine. 2. Desert Eyes LR, May 14th, 2008. Downloaded the map pack. The unmarked trail you mentioned isn't showing up on any other maps I've checked. You sure it's accessible with a standard Jeep? We don't have serious off-road tires. From Desert Eyes LR, May 14, 2008. Perfectly accessible. Just follow exactly the route I marked. Don't deviate. There are some restricted areas nearby you want to avoid. Military. Doesn't appreciate trespassers. This exchange reveals both Marcus's eagerness and Ren's calculated manipulation, using just enough truth to make his deception credible while playing on Marcus's ambitions. Ren was a skilled predator, says FBI profiler Dr. Elena Vasquez. He identified Marcus's vulnerabilities, his desire for recognition, his ambition to find something unique, and exploited them perfectly. By presenting himself as a gatekeeper to exclusive knowledge, he created a scenario where Marcus felt compelled to follow his directions exactly, even as they led into dangerous territory. The tension between Ethan and Marcus likely contributed to critical errors in judgment. Ethan's journal indicates he had doubts about the route but didn't assert himself strongly enough to change their course. Marcus, invested in proving his special knowledge would pay off, pushed forward despite mounting evidence they were heading into trouble. When you're young and male, there's this tremendous pressure not to appear weak or uncertain, explains Dr. Landon. Neither wanted to be the one to say, "This was a mistake, let's turn back." So they continued forward, each privately harboring doubts, but unwilling to voice them clearly. This dynamic is tragically common in wilderness fatalities. Studies show that approximately 62% of hiking and backpacking accidents involve some form of social facilitation error, where group members fail to speak up about concerns due to social pressure or relationship dynamics. The warning signs of dangerous relationship dynamics in adventure settings include unresolved arguments about navigation or safety decisions, one person withholding information that affects the group's journey, reluctance to voice concerns due to fear of conflict, competitive dynamics that encourage risk-taking, unwillingness to admit being lost, tired, or uncomfortable. What makes these interpersonal factors so dangerous is how subtly they influence critical decisions, says Wilderness Rescue Coordinator Thomas Blackburn. People don't realize that tension from an earlier disagreement might be affecting their judgment hours later when they need to make a life or death choice. For Ethan and Marcus, their unspoken rift created the perfect conditions for disaster. When their GPS began leading them onto increasingly remote trails, neither felt empowered to challenge the situation decisively. When they should have turned back, each waited for the other to suggest it first. And when they finally realized they were lost, precious hours had already been wasted. The saddest part, Rebecca reflects, is that if either of them had just said what they were really thinking, they might both be alive today. As investigators concluded in their final report, when relationships fracture on the road, every choice becomes amplified. The difference between trust and tragedy can fit in the space of a single, unspoken moment. Every device tells a story until it stops. The last signal pinged from Ethan's phone came at 9:42 p.m. near an abandoned utility site. 7 minutes later, Marcus's phone went offline too, then silence. Years later, digital forensics uncovered a chilling anomaly, a GPS spoof signal that overrode their last known location, masking it within a 10-mile radius. When Rebecca Cole first noticed the timing discrepancy in the original investigation reports, it seemed like a minor detail. Ethan's phone had stopped transmitting at exactly 9:42:18 p.m., while Marcus's continued until 9:49:47 p.m., 7 minutes and 29 seconds between disconnections. Initially, investigators assumed their batteries died at different times, or that they turned off their phones to conserve power, Rebecca explains. But when we re-examined the digital evidence with modern tools, we discovered something much more deliberate. Dr. Kwan's analysis revealed that both phones had been affected by a sophisticated signal jamming technique, one that wasn't widely understood in 2008 when the original investigation took place. What we found was evidence of GPS spoofing, a method of broadcasting false GPS signals that override genuine satellite data, Dr. Kwan explains. It's like creating a localized bubble where devices think they're somewhere they're not. This technology was primarily used by military and government contractors in the early 2000s, but it had become accessible to civilians with technical knowledge by 2008. The recovered data showed that something had broadcast false coordinates to Ethan and Marcus's devices, essentially creating a digital mirage that masked their true location from both themselves and any potential rescuers. Their phones didn't just lose signal, they were actively fed incorrect data, Detective Mendez explains. This explains why search teams focusing on their last ping location found nothing. They were searching miles from where Ethan and Marcus actually were. This digital deception wasn't the result of random interference or natural terrain barriers. The pattern of signal manipulation matched known techniques used by private contractors working in remote areas to protect sensitive operations from public observation. Further investigation revealed that Lyle Wren had worked briefly for a defense contractor in the early 2000s, where he likely gained access to this technology. Financial records showed he had purchased specialized radio equipment capable of generating localized GPS interference just months before Ethan and Marcus disappeared. He created what we call a dead zone by design, explained cybersecurity expert Mackenzie. First, he lured them onto remote roads where natural signal degradation would occur. Then, once they were isolated, he activated equipment that further corrupted their navigation data and blocked communication signals. This strategic combination of natural isolation and technological intervention made Ethan and Marcus particularly vulnerable. As darkness fell and they realized they were lost, their attempts to call for help or determine their location were subtly sabotaged by equipment they couldn't see. The timeline reconstructed from their devices tells a chilling story. 7:58 p.m. Last clear photograph taken by Ethan's camera, 8:17 p.m. GPS begins showing discrepancies between indicated location and actual terrain, 8:43 p.m. Marcus attempts to call his sister, but the call fails to connect, 9:12 p.m. Both phones record attempting to reconnect to network, automatic function, 9:42 p.m. Ethan's phone registers a final location ping, then goes silent, 9:49 p.m. Marcus's phone transmits final signal, location data corrupted. After 9:49 p.m., all digital traces vanish. The two men, already disoriented and increasingly concerned, were now completely cut off from the outside world. What makes this particularly insidious is that their devices would have appeared to function normally, says Dr. Kwan. The screens would still show maps and location data, but the information would be fiction. They likely thought they knew where they were, even as they became more lost. Similar signal manipulation has been documented in other contexts. In 2013, students at the University of Texas demonstrated how civilian ships could be redirected using GPS spoofing techniques. In 2018, diplomats in Cuba and China reported mysterious electronic interference that affected communication devices. And in 2016, Pokemon Go players in rural Missouri were directed to isolated locations where robberies occurred, a crude but effective form of digital misdirection. The technology has only become more accessible since 2008, warns Mackenzie. What required specialized equipment and technical knowledge then can now be accomplished with devices purchasable online for a few $100s. The warning signs of potential signal manipulation include unexplained discrepancies between GPS location and visible landmarks, devices showing full signal strength but inability to connect calls or messages, batteries draining unusually quickly, navigation systems jumping or showing erratic movement when you're stationary, multiple devices failing simultaneously in areas where service should be available. The most effective countermeasure is redundancy, advises Rodriguez. Never rely on a single device or navigation method. Paper maps don't experience signal interference. Satellite messengers operate on different frequencies than cell phones. And always tell multiple people your exact route and expected return time before venturing into remote areas. As the investigation concluded, when signals vanish, they don't always fade. Sometimes they're erased. Never assume what you see on a map is what exists in reality. After years of dead ends, a geocoding expert finally cracked the corrupted GPS data from Ethan's camera. The file didn't just contain their location. It formed a pattern of overlapping waypoints, circling something buried beneath the sand. It wasn't random. It was someone's mark. And at the final coordinate, they found remnants of the missing travelers, halfway submerged in the dunes, untouched since 2008. The breakthrough came in a fluorescent-lit laboratory at the Digital Forensics Research Center in Phoenix, where Dr. Kwan had spent weeks analyzing the recovered memory card. Most people think of digital photos as simply images, but they're actually complex data packages, she explains. Every photo contains metadata, information about when and where it was taken, what device was used, and sometimes hidden elements not visible in the image itself. The corrupted files from Ethan's camera contained fragments of location data that, when properly reassembled, revealed something unexpected: a deliberate pattern of GPS coordinates forming concentric circles around a central point. It wasn't natural corruption, Dr. Kwan says, pointing to the visualization on her screen. Someone had intentionally embedded these coordinates into the image files, creating what we call a steganographic message, information hidden within another format. When mapped, the coordinates formed a precise geometric pattern centered on a location approximately 2 miles from where the Jeep had been discovered. This pattern matched known survey techniques used by geological prospectors to mark significant findings without drawing attention from competitors. It was essentially a digital X marks the spot, says Detective Mendez. But the question remained, whose mark was it, and what was it pointing to? The metadata revealed an additional layer of information, a deleted user profile embedded in the file properties. Though partially corrupted, enough remained to connect it to an email address associated with Lyle Wren. That was our smoking gun, Mendez explains. Wren hadn't just lured them into the desert, he'd marked the location for some purpose. And then, we believe, he returned to eliminate any witnesses to whatever he was hiding out there. Armed with the precisely decoded coordinates, investigators obtained permission to excavate the central location indicated by the pattern. What they found confirmed their darkest suspicions. Beneath approximately 3 feet of accumulated sand lay the evidence they had sought for 15 years, remnants of a campsite, a partially melted tent, cooking equipment, and personal effects belonging to both Ethan and Marcus. More significantly, they discovered 2 sets of remains, identified through dental records as the missing friends. Forensic analysis suggested the cause of death was consistent with exposure and dehydration, but with a troubling detail. The position of the remains indicated the men had died inside their tent, apparently having settled in for the night rather than actively trying to find their way out. This contradicted our initial theory that they had wandered off searching for help, Mendez explains. Instead, it appears they made a rational decision to set up camp and wait for daylight, a standard wilderness survival protocol. They had water, food, and shelter. They should have survived the night. Further analysis revealed traces of an airborne sedative in the soil samples surrounding the tent, a compound that would induce drowsiness and confusion when inhaled. We believe Wren returned to the site after dark, Mendez continues. He used the chemical agent to ensure they wouldn't wake up, then methodically sabotaged their survival equipment, puncturing water containers, disabling their satellite radio, and removing batteries from flashlights. He wanted their deaths to appear as a tragic accident, not murder. The most disturbing evidence came from Wren's own records, recovered from his home after his death in 2012. A journal entry dated May 16, 2008, the day after Ethan and Marcus went missing, contained a chilling notation. Problem at Site 37 handled. Relocated vehicle to Ghost Road Junction. Sample secure. No witnesses. Another entry 3 days later read, Search helicopters focused on wrong quadrant. Misdirection successful. Will continue monitoring police frequencies. These entries confirmed what investigators had long suspected. Wren had deliberately moved the Jeep from the actual death site to create confusion and misdirect search efforts. He was playing a macabre game of chess with the search teams, says Mendez. While we focused on the area around the abandoned Jeep, the actual crime scene lay untouched miles away. But what was the sample Wren mentioned? What had been valuable enough to justify double murder? The answer lay in geological surveys of the area. The exact location marked by the coordinates contained a rare earth mineral deposit, elements crucial for advanced electronics manufacturing. In 2008, these minerals were just beginning to surge in value due to emerging smartphone technology. Wren, with his background in prospecting, had identified the deposit before official surveys. To exploit it illegally, he needed to keep the location secret, especially from authorities who would require permits and environmental impact studies. He created an elaborate system to protect his discovery, explains Mendez. The manipulated GPS routes, the signal jamming equipment, the digital markings only he could interpret, it was all designed to secure his claim while keeping others away. When Ethan and Marcus accidentally stumbled upon his operation, likely guided there by the very coordinates Wren had shared with Marcus as historical sites, they became liabilities that needed to be eliminated. The decoded coordinates not only solved the mystery of what happened to Ethan and Marcus, but also exposed a broader pattern of exploitation and deception. Wren's files contained similar coordinate markings for dozens of locations across the Southwest, each potentially representing other sites where illegal prospecting occurred. This wasn't just about one crime, Rebecca says. It was about a systematic effort to manipulate digital navigation for profit, regardless of the human cost. The warning signs of potentially manipulated location data include circular or geometric patterns in navigation guidance routes that repeatedly lead back to the same area despite attempts to leave destination coordinates that change slightly each time they're entered. Location services showing impossible travel speeds or jumps, navigation systems that insist you've reached your destination when clearly you haven't. In the digital age, coordinates are the new hieroglyphics, warns Dr. Kwan. They can tell stories, mark territories, or conceal secrets, but only to those who know how to read them. As the investigation concluded, not all truths vanish with time. Some just wait to be unlocked, line by coded line, until someone pays attention. The fluorescent lights in the conference room cast harsh shadows across the evidence boards where 15 years of investigation had been distilled into photographs, maps, and timelines. Rebecca Cole stood before the assembled investigators, journalists, and family members, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. What happened to Ethan and Marcus wasn't a random accident or a case of reckless adventure gone wrong, she began. It was the calculated result of technology weaponized against trust, a deliberate exploitation of how completely we surrender our judgment to digital guidance. On the main screen behind her, a map displayed the reconstructed route that had led her brother and his friend to their deaths. The blue line snaking through red desert terrain looked innocent enough, the kind of path millions of travelers follow daily without question. This is what they saw, Rebecca continued, pointing to the screen. A friendly suggestion, a scenic detour, a promise of something special just a little way off the main road. There was no way for them to know that the route existed only in digital space. that it had been created specifically to lure people like them into isolation. For Marcus's sister, Jenna Delaney, the revelation brought a complex mixture of grief and vindication. "Everyone assumed they were just careless," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "That they took stupid risks or weren't prepared, but they were methodical. They researched. They had water, emergency supplies, charged phones. What they couldn't prepare for was someone deliberately manipulating the system they trusted to keep them safe." The story had implications far beyond one tragic disappearance. As Detective Mendez explained to the assembled group, the investigation had uncovered at least 11 similar cases across the Southwest between 2006 and 2012. Instances where travelers vanished after following GPS directions onto unmarked roads. In 3 cases, vehicles were found abandoned in remote locations. In others, neither the travelers nor their vehicles were ever recovered. "We've been able to link 7 of these disappearances to coordinate patterns matching those used in the Cole Delaney case," Mendez said. "The signature is distinctive: concentric circular waypoints, modified firmware, and strategic signal disruption near the final location." The implications extended into the present day. While Lyle Wren's specific technique might have died with him, the vulnerability he exploited remained. Modern navigation systems still prioritize digital information over visible reality, and users still follow directions with implicit trust. "What's changed," warned Dr. Kwan, "is the sophistication and accessibility of GPS manipulation technology. What required specialized knowledge in 2008 can now be accomplished with commercially available equipment. The potential for exploitation has only increased." The case had already prompted changes in how missing persons reports involving navigation anomalies were handled. The FBI had established a dedicated task force for investigations where digital misdirection might be a factor. Navigation software companies were implementing additional verification protocols to prevent unauthorized route insertion. But for Rebecca, these systemic changes, while necessary, couldn't erase the 15 years of uncertainty or bring back Ethan and Marcus. "The most painful part wasn't just losing my brother," she told the room. "It was the not knowing. The endless scenarios that play through your mind when someone vanishes without explanation. Did he suffer? Could he have been saved? Was he trying to call for help when no one could hear him?" Now those questions had answers. Answers embedded in lines of code, in digital breadcrumbs left behind in corrupted files, in the silent testimony of coordinates decoded years after they were created. As the formal presentation concluded, Rebecca remained in the conference room, studying the map that had finally revealed the truth. The desert that had kept its secret for so long now seemed smaller somehow, less mysterious, but no less dangerous. Detective Mendez approached, his expression solemn. "You know, in all my years investigating disappearances, this case changed how I see technology the most," he said quietly. "We think we're navigating the world, but really, we're just following lines someone else drew for us." Rebecca nodded, her finger tracing the fatal blue line on the screen. "Ethan used to say something similar about photography," she replied. "That the frame doesn't capture reality, it creates it. The picture is only what someone decided was worth seeing." Outside, the Arizona sunset painted the desert in the same golden hues captured in Ethan's final photograph. Rebecca gathered her materials, preparing to drive back to her hotel. Her phone chimed with a notification. "Traffic alert. Alternate route available. Save 12 minutes." She stared at the screen for a long moment, then powered off the device and placed it in her bag. From the glove compartment, she withdrew a paper map of Arizona, creased and worn from frequent use. Some journeys were better navigated the old way, with clear eyes and the humility to admit when you might be lost. 15 years of silence ended with numbers, cold, digital, indisputable. But behind every coordinate lies a story, A warning, a plea from the past. Pay attention to the small signs. Trust can mislead. Technology can lie. Patterns can deceive. And sometimes the most dangerous detours start with the words rerouting for a faster path. 1 year after the Cole Delaney case was officially closed, Rebecca stood at the site where her brother had died. The landscape remained largely unchanged. The same red rocks, the same vast sky, the same implacable silence. But now a small memorial marker stood at the center of what had once been just another stretch of anonymous desert. The marker bore no elaborate inscription, just 2 names and dates, and below them, a simple warning. Question the path. Trust your instincts. Remember Ethan and Marcus. It wasn't meant for tourists. The location remained difficult to access, unmarked on official maps. But for those who knew the story, other families touched by similar tragedies, investigators who handled missing persons cases, journalists covering digital security, it had become something of a pilgrimage site. Rebecca knelt and placed a small stone on top of the marker, following a tradition she'd established during her previous visits. Each stone represented a question answered, a piece of the puzzle completed. "The documentary airs next month," she said aloud, her voice barely carrying in the vast space. "People are already responding to the trailer. They're checking their GPS settings, buying paper maps as backups. Maybe some good will come from all of this in the end." Her phone remained powered off in her pocket. Though she'd kept the device, modern life made total disconnection impractical. She no longer followed its guidance unquestioningly. None of them did anymore. Not Jenna, not Detective Mendez, not anyone who had worked closely on the case. They had all seen too clearly how the technology that promised to guide could just as easily mislead. As Rebecca prepared to leave, she noticed something half buried in the sand near the marker. A small, rectangular object glinting in the sunlight. Brushing away the red dust revealed a memory card similar to the one from Ethan's camera, though newer. She held it carefully, turning it over in her palm. It hadn't been there during her last visit 2 months ago. Someone had placed it here deliberately recently. Back in her vehicle, Rebecca examined the card more closely. No identifying marks, no indication of its contents or origin. Her first instinct was to insert it into her laptop and see what it contained, but the lessons of Ethan's case gave her pause. Instead, she placed the card in an evidence bag and called Detective Mendez. "I found something at the site," she explained. "A memory card, left recently. I didn't open it." "Good," he responded immediately. "Don't. Bring it to the lab. After everything we've learned, we don't take digital artifacts at face value anymore." 3 days later, in the secure digital forensics laboratory, Dr. Kwan analyzed the card using isolated systems designed for examining potentially compromised media. "It contains a single file," she reported, her expression troubled. "A set of coordinates in the same circular pattern we found in Ethan's camera. But these are new locations spread across Nevada and Utah." "Wren died years ago," Mendez said, frowning at the screen. "Who would use his signature pattern now?" "Someone who studied his techniques," Rebecca suggested, "or someone who worked with him." Further analysis revealed metadata linking the file to an email address associated with Wren's former business partner, a man who had been questioned during the original investigation but never charged. He had disappeared shortly after Wren's death, his current whereabouts unknown. "He's still out there," Rebecca realized, "still using the same methods, still marking sites that he doesn't want others to find." "And he's sending us a message," Mendez added grimly. "He knows we decoded Wren's system. This is either a warning or a challenge." The coordinates were provided to federal authorities, who discovered evidence of illegal rare earth mineral extraction at 3 of the identified sites. But the individual behind the operations remained elusive, a digital ghost who had learned from Wren's mistakes, leaving fewer traces, operating with greater caution. For Rebecca, the discovery brought a disturbing clarity. The case that had consumed 15 years of her life wasn't truly over. The methods that had led to her brother's death had evolved, adapted, spread like a virus through digital systems designed to guide and protect. In her final documentary segment, recorded after the memory card discovery, Rebecca faced the camera with renewed purpose. When Ethan and Marcus followed that fatal detour, they couldn't have known they were part of something larger, an exploitation of trust that continues today. Their story isn't just about what happened to them. It's about what could happen to any of us when we stop questioning the path we're on. The desert kept its new secrets, but now there were people who knew how to listen, how to hear the warnings hidden in digital static, how to recognize the patterns disguised as coincidence. For every route designed to mislead, there were now eyes watching for the signs. For every signal meant to vanish, there were those determined to track its source. The digital desert had claimed its victims, but it had also created its own hunters, people who understood that sometimes the most dangerous wilderness isn't the one you can see, but the invisible landscape of data flowing beneath the world's surface. Rebecca powered on her GPS unit as she prepared to drive away from the memorial site. The screen flickered to life, calculating her position. A notification appeared. Alternative route available. Save 15 minutes? Her finger hovered over the screen for a moment. Then she pressed decline and followed the main highway back towards civilization. The longer route, but one she knew was real. Behind her, the desert stretched endlessly beneath the afternoon sun, its silence unbroken except for the whisper of wind across the sand. And beneath that, the faint, steady pulse of signals crossing the empty air, drawing their invisible maps across the wilderness. Every road leaves a trace, but not every trace tells the truth. Look closer. Question every path, because sometimes the map doesn't lead you home. It leads you to the truth or into silence.